I did 29 years in uniform, retired as a U.S. Navy captain. I did retire from the active duty list, but I had some reserve time in there. 23 years total active. I started life as a naval flight officer trainee. As you might well imagine, I drank my way out of flight school. Went off to try and find a job within the armed services, still drinking, but eventually found my way into public affairs, and that was my career field. I started drinking at the age of 13, just mostly experimenting. The first time I ever got drunk was 15, and I got hit by a car, and a friend of mine tried to kill himself. And I remember saying that night, that's it, I'm never doing this again, and never lasted about 30 days. So you could say that drinking became a problem then, but certainly by the time I was 16, I was drinking alcoholically, and I was having consequences. My grades wavered a little bit, school attendance wavered a little bit, but the real impact was felt with family and a girlfriend at the time. And when I went off to college in North Carolina, I was raring to go. When I was a junior officer on an aircraft carrier on the West Coast, there'd been a few DWIs in the news in the Navy for chiefs and officers, and the 3-star in our chain of command said, the first khaki, E7 or above who gets a DUI or DWI comes before me with his commanding officer in tow and gets a 3-star ass chewing. And I was driving drunk every day, with the notable exception of duty days when I just wasn't driving. So I decided then that not to control my drinking, but to control my driving. I made a concerted effort to avoid driving after I've had more than a few, with mixed results. So I drank my way out of flight school. I drank my way out of a marriage, which incidentally I drank my way into. My first wife and I met at a happy hour at the Mustin Beach O Club on Naval Air Station, Pensacola. I'd been there for about 3.5 hours. I drank that whole time. She arrived in a similar state, and that was that. So I didn't have a viable career. I'd been invited to leave the home. I was fairly distant from my family at that point, but I didn't want them to see the mess I'd become, really. Funny thing was that after I drank my way out of flight school, I was on the verge of being returned to the civilian world when I was offered a chance to stay in the Navy, to transfer to an aircraft carrier on the West Coast and become the substance abuse coordinator, what we now call a drug and alcohol program advisor. And I was asked if I'd had any problems with drinking or drugs within the last 2 years. I said, no. Military service and urinalysis meant I didn't smoke dope anymore, but I sure drank like a fish. But I hadn't had consequences that left legal marks. I had no DUIs, DWIs. I had no arrests, nothing that left a paper trail. So I went off to run the drug and alcohol program on a carrier, had to go to training, had to go to a couple of AA meetings while I was in training. So my job was to evaluate sailors, and if they were deemed salvageable, try to get them help. I'd had 15 months sending people to treatment. I'd been to a couple of meetings as part of my training. I'd had people invite me to attend meetings with them on pretext of they didn't want to go alone. These were attempts at 12 steps. I was immune. I didn't see that I had any problem at all. When we were underway on the ship, there were meetings right next door to my office, and 3 days a week. And some of these guys I'd sent to treatment, and they'd come in and, tell me how they were doing, and sometimes thank me for saving their life. And so I knew there was recovery. And I had 2 guys working for me who were in recovery. One was an alcoholic, one was a drug addict. So in June of 1986, when I had been invited to leave my home and had $700 in my pocket, was living on the ship, I did an exercise in Hawaii and then had a week in Pearl Harbor. I drank $700 worth of booze in 5 days of liberty, and I couldn't get drunk. I forgot to lay in a stash for the trip home, and after 7 days at sea, I was stark raving dry and, yelling at my troops in formation in the hangar bay and just being a miserable ass. And the recovering alcoholic who worked for me, Bruce, knew that something had to be done. And so he, my chief, who was the recovering addict, at his bidding, Bruce came in and sort of did a one-man intervention and sat down and came into my office. And he'd never called me anything but sir or Mr. And Bruce said, Dave, you and me got to talk. That was on the 30th of June, 1986. My last drink was on the 23rd of June, 1986. No, I don't see any conflicts. I had a top security clearance with special access, and I maintained that. And of course, part of my record was that I'd been to treatment and I was a recovering alcoholic. I never made any secret of that, nor did that ever delay or impinge my access to classified information. I went to the parties, sort of those command performances when I had to go. I just made sure I kept, sparkling water in my hand. And when people started getting sloppy, as would happen, then I'd made sure I'd already shaken hands with the admiral and the chief of staff and the captain and the XO and my department head, and then I left. I'd meet young enlisted guys in the meetings, and of course in the meetings I was just Dave, and we'd meet in the passageway and they'd say, "Hey Dave, how you doing?" And I'd have to get stern and lean up to them and say, "That's only inside the rooms. Out here I'm lieutenant." Practicing the principles in my career the principles of AA has certainly been an advantage, been helpful. I have, avoided resentments and spats and tiffs with seniors and peers. I approach leadership as a form of service, and I know it's not about me. AA has been extremely helpful, keeping me viable and enhancing my ability to be of service in uniform and now in my life past it. I'm sort of an AA tourist. I think today I prefer the term AA traveler, but when I travel, I go to meetings. And I have been to meetings in 29 different countries: Poland, Germany, Singapore, Tallinn, Estonia, Latvia. Malta was just a terrific place to visit, but it's a great place to go to meetings. The Philippines, Korea, Japan, Iraq, and Afghanistan. And interestingly, I couldn't find one in Pakistan. Pakistan doesn't have any kind of an intergroup or an AA support function. They use India. I thought that was pretty interesting. My first sponsor used to say it took every last drink to get me into recovery. If I'd had one more, I'd have died. And if I'd had one fewer, I'd have still been making excuses. The career was definitely not anything I had imagined or planned when I started in the military at the tender age of 23 in a bad drunk. But I wouldn't change any of it for anything. I'm where I'm supposed to be. All of the hard experience, now a gift that I can share with others. My experience, strength, and hope. It's been a great ride. I've met many, many, many wonderful people. As my first sponsor used to say, I got over 1 million friends in the world. I just haven't met them all yet.